Hello and welcome back to another beautiful day of ecology. We are now on to day 8, so we are almost done with this unit, which is crazy. But as always, have your notes out and ready to go as we go along through this video together. And similarly, write down any questions you have and make sure you ask those to your teacher so that they can answer your questions ASAP. Okay, so today's aim is how do some organisms interact with one another in an ecosystem? Now, one thing we should definitely annotate is the word ecosystem. Now, if you remember, I've actually gone over this word before, and when we talk about ecosystems, we're talking about the interaction between abiotic and biotic factors, or living and non-living factors. Okay, so next to the word ecosystem, I'm going to write down, this is the interaction between biotic or living and abiotic or non-living factors. So we're talking about how those things work together and interact with each other. So keep that in mind as we go through this video and figure out how do some organisms interact with each other in an ecosystem. So today's do now, we've got 2 questions. Number 1 says, what is the relationship between mosquitoes and us? Who helps whom? All right, well, there is a special word we use to describe this, but I'm not sure if you guys know it yet. However, you should feel pretty comfortable with this idea. I'm sure many of you have been bitten by mosquitoes before, and it's not exactly a pleasant experience. So right now, pause this video and write down, what do you think the relationship between mosquitoes and humans is? And as soon as you've written your answer, go ahead and press play and we'll go over it. All right, so you might have heard the word parasite used to describe mosquitoes. And that's not a coincidence, because the relationship we're talking about here is something called parasitism, which basically means that this mosquito is benefiting. I mean, it's sucking up all of our blood, it's having a play day with our blood, but we're not exactly benefiting. We're actually harmed by that mosquito. We're left with some pretty nasty bug bites, and we can possibly be exposed to some diseases that they carry, such as malaria. So in this case, the mosquito is the parasite, and we are the victim. So one organism is benefited. I'm going to say the mosquito. Mosquito benefits, and we are harmed. All right, so we're helping the mosquito, but the mosquito is not helping us. All right, number 2, what is the relationship between bees and flowers? Who helps whom? So think back to our reproduction unit. We talked about the relationship between bees and flowers. Same deal, pause this video, write down your answer, and then we'll go over it. All right, so in this example, they actually help each other out. So bees help flowers and flowers help bees. And this is something we call mutualism. Mutualism because both organisms benefit. So the bee is benefited because it's able to pick up pollen and nectar and use those for nourishment. And the flowers are benefited because the bees spread their pollen, which leads to more sexual reproduction. It spreads their genetic material and allows more flowers to be born. I guess they're not born, but it allows more flowers to be created. So both organisms in this example are benefited, and because of that, we call it mutualism, where there is a mutual benefit. And we're going to dig into these definitions in a bit more detail in just a minute. So if you're a little bit confused, hang on and I'll explain some more. All right, once again, if you have any questions, please write them down. So both mutualism and parasitism are a type of symbiosis. And symbiosis is just a word that we use to describe interactions between organisms. There's 3 types. So there's parasitism, mutualism, and then there's one more that you're going to see in just a minute. So this is an example of symbiosis right here, because this crocodile and this bird are working together. I know you're probably sitting here worried for this bird's life. You're thinking, that is that crocodile's lunch. Things aren't looking good. But these two organisms actually are in a mutualistic relationship. Now, they're not going on dates, okay? They're not actually in a relationship, but they're helping each other out, whether it looks like it or not. So essentially, the crocodile, whenever it has like leftover food in its teeth or it needs its teeth to be cleaned, it calls the dentist. And the dentist in this case is this bird. And this bird sits in the crocodile's mouth and picks out all of the leftover food, and it cleans that crocodile's teeth. But in the process, that bird's actually getting its lunch. So they help each other out because the bird's able to pick up some food that it might not otherwise get, and the crocodile is able to get its teeth cleaned. So this is an example of mutualism, which is a type of symbiosis. Okay, so let's review some definitions before we go any deeper. The first thing I want us to review is the concept of ecosystems. So we mentioned this at the beginning. This is organisms interacting with each other and the environment. But the first thing you need to know is that abiotic, which are non-living factors, and biotic or living factors are working together to create an ecosystem. So something like a tiger right here could be interacting with this rock that we see over here, and that's going to be creating some sort of ecosystem. So it's the living tiger and the non-living rock working together in the environment. So the area in which an organism lives is called its habitat. This is basically like an organism's home. Where it lives is its habitat. In its habitat, each organism needs to fill a different, oh, well, that's not correct. Hold on, there it is. In its habitat, each organism needs to fill a different role. It has a different purpose or a job. Okay, so obviously the tiger's role in this ecosystem is different than this bird's role. They've got different jobs to do. And the way that an organism uses and affects the resources within its habitat or its home is called its niche. You might also hear this called a niche. Either pronunciation is fine. So an organism's niche, this is a super important word, includes a few different things. This is basically the organism's job or purpose in an environment. So this involves things like what the organism eats, what eats it. My cat is making weird noises. The resources that the organism uses or creates, the physical conditions needed for that organism to survive. Oh, this is a lot. How it reproduces, and any relationships it has with other organisms. Okay, now I know that was a lot, but overall, this word niche is just talking about what purpose does that animal serve in an environment. I like to think of it kind of like the organism's resume. Let me show you what I mean. So it's an organism's resume because it's basically a list. It's like a Wikipedia article of everything that organism has to offer. So it's a list of what the organism eats, what eats it, what it does, where it lives. It's basically everything you need to know about that organism and how it makes a living. So let's learn more about niches. Okay, so niches help reduce competition. However, competition still exists because some aspects of that niche is going to overlap with different organisms. So some organisms might eat the same types of food or might live in the same environments. And because of that, their niches overlap in some sense, where they have similar purposes or similar roles to play. And because of this, even though each species fills a different niche, if two species filled exactly the same role, there would be competition because they would need to compete over the food or the places to live or those resources. Organisms would be competing over different things. So there are multiple niches in one habitat because of the variety of life that exists there. every single one of these organisms is going to have a different resume or a different niche to fill because there's so much variety. One species would be slightly more successful, causing the other species to die off. And other factors can cause a population to decline as well. So we're going to dive into some more of those factors later, as well as we probably already touched on some. So there's some connections you can make there. All right. Once again, if you have any questions, write it down. All right, competition. So any resource that affects an organism's growth, size, species population, or distribution is considered a limiting factor. I would highlight that word or underline it or something because you'll see the word limiting factor a lot as well. And we call it a limiting factor because it limits the growth of the species. And we call it that because if that resource is taken away or added, that organism or population will suffer. So it's something that limits the growth of the species and basically keeps that species in check. So limiting factors can affect organisms or on an individual level or at the population level. So this is something that can affect just one individual organism or it can affect that entire species, okay? So go ahead and write that down. Now, some examples of limiting factors are going to be things like food, like this up here. If there's not enough food for an entire species to survive, that's going to keep the growth of that species in check. It's not as many organisms are going to be able to survive if there's not enough food. Another thing is going to be predators. Now, I'm not sure why this image was chosen because this is something straight out of a nightmare, but predators are obviously going to keep prey populations in check because if there are predators like this horrific guy over here eating different types of prey, that's going to affect the growth of a species. Okay, so food, predators, as well as shelter. Okay, if there's not enough shelter for organisms to all live peacefully, that's going to be a limiting factor because there's not going to be enough places for them to take cover and they're going to be left exposed to things like these predators who are going to eat them and take them away. So all of these are examples of limiting factors, so things like food, predators, and shelter. All right, and moving on. We've got some more competition examples here. Members of different species may compete for food, space, and prey on one another. It's kind of what we just talked about. There's going to be some competition for resources. Members of the same species will compete with one another for food, but they may also compete over living space as well as mates. If, let's say, these two giraffes, they're in love with the same girl, they're going to compete over that because they both want a mate, okay? And that's going to be competition because there's not enough mates to go around, okay? Next up, organisms that get food and living space are more likely to find a mate and pass on their favorable traits. So this is what leads to adaptations because of the natural selection. And we're going to talk about adaptations, I think, on the next slide. All right, go ahead and write these things down. And once again, I'll say it for, I think, the third or fourth time. If you have questions, please write them down and ask us so that we can answer them for you. All right, moving on. Yes, I was right. All right, adaptations. So the favorable traits that are passed on cause organisms to become better adapted to their environments through evolution. Okay, that's obviously not showing up, but adaptations are just those favorable traits that allow organisms to survive. I know the word adaptation makes it seem like one individual organism is adapting to its environment, but these are more often described as traits that allow them to survive. So any trait that helps an organism survive is an adaptation. And some examples of this are mimicry, camouflage, and self-defense. So mimicry is when one organism basically mimics or tries to act like a different organism. So I don't have a picture of this on here, but I saw one example floating around on Twitter a few days ago where there's a type of caterpillar that has this adaptation where its skin looks like the face of a snake. So in that case, the caterpillar is mimicking a snake. And why do you think that would be helpful for that caterpillar? Obviously, you can't answer me right now, but the caterpillar looks like a snake. And so other organisms are going to take a look and be like, oh crap, that's a predator. I got to get out of here, even though it's just a measly caterpillar. So that mimicry allows the caterpillar to survive because not as many predators are going to come and get it because it's mistaken for a predator. Some examples of camouflage can be seen here. So this praying mantis is white and it blends in with that white flower that we see. So it's not as easily spotted. Same thing with this green frog, as the exact same color as the environment it's living in, as well as, I don't know if you can see down here at the bottom, but this, let's see, this is actually, oh my gosh, this is a sort of octopus that's blending in with its environment. It's almost the same color, so you can't see that it's there if you don't see this one little eye. And you can kind of see its tentacles if you look closely, but the average fish is not going to notice that and is going to fall victim to that camouflage. Okay, some other examples. Oh, and here's an example of mimicry as well. So this is a type of bug that looks exactly like a stick or a twig. So it mimics that, it looks like a twig, and so people, or not people, but predators don't notice it and leave it alone because they just think it's another twig on a bush. And of course, self-defense. We've got our lovely porcupine right here. It's got those needles that are able to fend off predators and damage them should they come closely. I thought I had more pictures here, but maybe not. Okay. All right. Now, here are some more examples of those relationships we talked about earlier. Okay, so symbiosis is a word we use to describe relationships between species, relationships in which two species live very closely together. So sometimes these are helpful, sometimes these are bad, and sometimes they don't really have any effect at all. But regardless, with symbiosis, we're talking about organisms that live very closely together. So the first type of symbiosis is what we call mutualism. And this is when both species benefit from their relationship. So they are mutually benefiting, which means they're both benefiting from this relationship. So we talked about the picture at the beginning with the crocodile and the bird. It's also seen right here. There are some other examples. Similarly, there's this eel and this shrimp up here, and similarly to that crocodile and bird, the shrimp hangs out on the eel and basically picks up like any sort of algae or food that may be left on that eel. So the eel basically gets bathed for free, and the shrimp is able to pick up little bits of food and eat. Let's see some other examples. So here we've got a zebra with another species of bird, and the birds hang out on the zebra and basically eat the bugs that are on it. So it's able to, same thing, the zebra gets a free bath and is free of those pests, and the birds get a nice little meal, a nice snack. Okay, this one right here is a relationship between a shrimp and a fish. This species of shrimp is actually blind, so it can't see when predators are coming towards it. So it basically digs holes into the sand and crawls inside of them. And in that same, wow, I'm butchering this. Okay, so the shrimp digs holes in the sand. Then this little species of fish right here goes into that hole with the shrimp because it needs a place to live. So the shrimp digs it a little hole, the fish slides in, and then when the fish and shrimp go and live in there together, the fish protects the shrimp from predators. So it's looking out for its little blind friend. And then, of course, last but not least, we've got the clownfish and the sea anemone. God. And I'm sure you've seen this in Finding Nemo, where the anemone, I can never say this, shocks every single organism that comes near it. except for this clownfish. So the clownfish is able to live peacefully inside this anemone, and the anemone like electrocutes any organism that comes near. So then the clownfish is able to eat that food, and the anemone benefits because it gets clean when that fish brushes up against its tentacles, I guess you could call them, as well as it increases oxygen flow when that fish is swimming around. So it gets a nice little breezy benefit there. So those are all examples of mutualism, where both organisms are benefiting. But we also have types of symbiosis that are not so beneficial. We've got things like parasitism, which is where one species benefits and the other species is harmed by that relationship. So, oh no, guys, I can never get this right. With parasitism, we're talking about things like, of course, the mosquito that we mentioned earlier. So the mosquito is a parasite to humans and other organisms because the mosquito is benefiting, but the other organism is harmed. And finally, the last type of symbiosis is known as commensalism. So this is when one organism benefits and the other isn't really affected. So the other is neither benefited nor harmed. It's just kind of indifferent. It's not affected, it's just hanging out. And I don't have any examples of commensalism on this slide, but I do have some on the next slide, okay? So let's go over a few more examples. So once again, mutualism is when both species benefit. Some examples of that are bees and flowers, like we talked about with the do know, as well as two other things, legumes and nitrogen-fixing bacteria, as well as termites and protozoa. If you are interested in this, feel free to look those up, but for time, I'm gonna move us forward. So on your paper, there's a place for you to write down an example of each of these. This is the one we're looking for, although you could have written any of those from the last slide. All right, next up, we've got parasitism. Same thing, this is when the parasite benefits and the host is harmed. This can be things like heartworms, which are super gross, but also super interesting. So feel free to look up some videos of heartworms. They look like pasta noodles, but they're alive and they're just, oh. But the example I want you to write down is that fleas feed on blood. You could have also written down the mosquito example, but a flea is a similar parasite where it feeds on the blood of organisms. Your pet might have had fleas before. So the flea is benefiting, but the dog or the cat is not. All right. Last but not least, we've got commensalism. Once again, this is when one organism benefits while the other is unaffected. It's not harmed, it's not benefiting, it's just there. So some examples of these are things like dust mites on your eyebrows. I know this is probably gross to many of you, but you've got many, many little dust mites living on your eyebrows and on your scalp right now. And obviously, they're not affecting us. We are not affected by their presence, but those dust mites are thriving on us because they just walk along our skin and pick up all of our dead skin cells. So the dust mites are thriving, they're benefiting, but we're not affected at all. We're not harmed, we're not benefited. We're just, I mean, some of you probably didn't even know that they were there. So that is the beauty of commensalism, because we're helping those dust mites out, but it doesn't affect us at all. Some other examples of that are when orchids grow on trees, bacteria in your intestines, as well as barnacles on whales. So barnacles grow on the surface of whales. It kind of almost looks like mold, but they're just these little organisms that grow on the side of whales and pick up any sort of microorganisms as the whale is swimming, and that those nutrients allow them to survive. The barnacles are thriving, the whales are unaffected. Okay, so these are all examples of commensalism. All right, so last but not least, those are all the slides I have for you, but now I'm going to show you guys a video that talks about the different types of symbiosis. And as you watch this video, I want you to answer, I think there are 10 questions on your paper. I might have lied about that. But watch this video, answer those questions. I'm not going to go over the answers with you, but make sure that you have those answers on your paper when you turn it in. If you have any questions, this is, I think, the 5th time I've said it, please let me know. I can't help you if I don't know that you're struggling. So let us know if there's anything you don't understand, and we would be happy to go over it with you again, okay? I'm signing off. I don't think you want to sit here and watch my face in the corner of your screen as we watch this video. So sit back, relax, watch this video, and then answer the questions on your paper. Okay? Have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys later.